there. Hello, my name is Jason McSparron, and I am the Vice President of Research and Grant Writing at the Green Institute. Welcome to the World Environment Day 2023, in which we are looking to talk about beating plastic pollution. This is session 4, and we are going to be talking about the economics of the issue today with 3 really fantastic guests. We have Professor Ian Thomson, the Director of the Center for Responsible Business at the University of Birmingham. He is also the convener of the Center for Social and Environmental Accounting Research. Professor Thomson is also part of the Birmingham Plastics Network, which is very pertinent to us today, an interdisciplinary team of more than 40 academics working together to shape the fate and create a sustainable future for plastics in our natural environment. And without any ado, Professor Thomson, are you ready to present?
I am, yes. Thank
Excellent.
you. So thank you for this opportunity to share some of my work over the last period on this really critically important sort of like a day, World Environment Day. Anyway, one of the focus I want to take today, which is perhaps a little bit unusual, is to look at this kind of the classic case of the accountant saying no. And that often in sustainability, particularly kind of issues to do with plastic and other things, we often like to think that we've got evidence-based decision making. Our research to date suggests that we don't have evidence-based decision making. Often we have ignorance-based decision making. And that the real kind of like critical part of this, of part of the whole chain of events that needs to go through to make sustainable change to systemic problems, for example, like plastic, is that it has to go through certain obligatory kind of like passage points. And one of them is actually confronting the accountant. Because how do we really know if a business, a product, a project, an idea, or a policy is truly sustainable? Or if that solution will contribute positively without damaging the integrity or resilience of other socio-ecological systems? Do we know how or why businesses make decisions that actually damage themselves and their planet? I mean, there's very little doubt that conventional accounting methods and values have helped create our unsustainable world. But like a question which I've been working to is it possible to create accounting methods and models that are aligned with sustainable transformation? Now, agreed, accounting is not the most inspiring topic associated with saving ourselves or the planet or addressing the problem we have with plastic. This underplays a remarkable power that accounting has in its position as a major barrier to be overcome. Most sustainable projects and proposals and technologies fail to navigate through the conventional accounting black box, and also the sort of like the environmental variants of it, largely because the full costs of unsustainable practices are significantly underestimated, and the benefits of sustainable practices are also significantly underestimated. I mean, it has been argued that we should integrate life cycle greenhouse gas emissions alongside any other kind of economic cost benefit. And while this is an important step in the right direction, it's just a start, because any solution to our unsustainability needs to be evaluated against all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. My argument, which I'm going to hopefully demonstrate, is unless we eliminate the biases in how we evaluate the sustainability of things, authentic sustainable projects will remain as possibilities and will continue to incentivize unsustainable practices, implement solutions that make things worse, and avoid holding our leaders accountable for their impact on critical socio-ecological systems. Now, I mentioned that one of the things that we wanted to look at was this idea of different frameworks. This is a life cycle greenhouse gas accounting. Very difficult to argue this is how we should be doing it. If we look at things from the conventional net zero black box, what we find is we have a partial very, very partial, limited view of what happens. And rather than when somebody, a business or anyone's looking at a particular solution, rather than looking at this form of kind of resolution, this stuff here, they only see this. This means that any costs, any benefits that fall outside this lens in this black box will not be taken into account into any decision making. And in particular importance that when we look at things like sustainable plastics, what we find is things like biodegradable plastics. When we run it through the conventional accounting box, the answer is no. Changing raw material sources and feedstock, the conventional accounting black box says no. When we look at recycling plastics, again, conventional accounting black box is no. And when we look at circular economy plastics, the answer is often no. Simply because the black box that's actually created was created for a different purpose, and it actually does not take into account environmental, social, or economic factors. And most people don't look inside the black box and don't understand why things are no. Sometimes they trust it, sometimes they hate it, sometimes they're just totally puzzled by it. So what we need to do is to open up this black box and start to look at life cycle things and look at where the impact of these different decisions are and understand maybe why it's not there. When we look at biodegradable plastics, particularly what we find is we're just looking at one part of the life cycle analysis where we've got some benefit, but we've also got some other costs. But most of the rest of the supply chain, value chain remains the same. So when we're looking at one thing, we're also not looking at another. When we look at biodegradable plastics, it's not always good because it can often impact on natural systems. When we look at changing raw materials, typically what we find is we're just looking at the other end of the value cycle. And we kind of tend to look at that, but we ignore the consequences all the way across the chain. And what we need to do is to look at the impact across the chain and the consequences of different things. When we look at recycling plastic, again, we can see that there's pluses and there's minuses, there's positives and there's negatives. There's typically more energy, there's more sort of like logistics, but there are some kind of clear benefits. But very seldom do we actually look at this thing in the whole and look at the whole consequences. Circular plastics is one of the ones which often fails the biggest from conventional analysis and even some straightforward one because of the range of the different activities and all the consequences, the inputs typically fall outside the main focus of what's actually sort of going on. And so what we can see, unless we have a life cycle approach, unless we look at all of the different aspects and all of the different dimensions of sustainability, it's very difficult to see how you can actually have an evidence base that you can actually work with. One of the things that we like to do is actually to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a very kind of straightforward way of actually evaluating, opening up the black box, and look at the extent to which the black box, the way in which any decision is evaluated, measured, or valued, or costed, actually the extent to which it represents all of the elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of them misleadingly represents relationships inaccurately, is not connected, and is felt not to be important. The problem is when we look at most of the decisions, most of the outcomes, most of the evaluations, what we're actually dealing with is only the one or two relationships that are actually fully measured. The rest of it is basically a zone of ignorance, functional blind spots, and future risk and disruptors that actually goes on. That's why I kind of like making the point that in many cases, unless we explicitly look and redesign how we evaluate things, we're using ignorance-based decision making rather than evidence-based decision making. And that somewhat explains why many of the problems that we have solutions to continue to be problems and continue not to be operationalized. If any of you are interested any more, we've developed this into a text here where we explain things in more than 10 minutes. So thank you.
Again, this idea of a life cycle approach, and you talking about, unpacking that black box of accounting.
Yeah.
This is really interesting research. And again, these are the types of things that, corporations, households, we need to start to think about these things, because we have to start to sort through these issues.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. I was agreeing with you.
Yes, and I really do appreciate the incorporation of the Sustainable Development Goals in accounting, because again, corporations are big players. They can lead in a lot of these issues, and it's really good to see that this research is being done and being published at this point. I'd like to give you a couple of moments to relax as we go on to our next guest.
Yep.
And then we are going to circle back and ask you a few questions about your research, and you can expand a little bit more on that really interesting and pertinent presentation.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'd like to introduce everyone to